Could Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti be backed into a corner and be forced to embrace a new Super League? Will their members demand that they have these conversations? And it may not be the Super League that we thought it was going to be that came out a couple of weeks ago. No, there is a new Super League proposal on the table. And that's what we're going to talk about today on this edition of Couz's Corner, this live edition of Couz's Corner. What is going on out there, Couz's Corner family? Welcome in. Belly yourself up to the bar and let me pour you out this shot of top-shelf college football content in this show that is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino and Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner Attorneys at Law. Thank them for helping us keep the lights on for this episode. And before we get into the episode, which, again, I'm going to be talking about the new Super League proposal that's out there right now, I want to give a shout-out to one of those sponsors. Since 1931, the attorneys at Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner have been the voice for victims who have suffered serious injury or death. They have a fierce passion for truth and justice and a sincere compassion for those who have been wronged by others. Whether you have been in a car accident or fighting with an insurance company, or you or a loved one has suffered serious injury or death due to medical negligence, we will ensure your voice is heard loud and clear. Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner will ensure there is justice for all West Virginians because we are your lawyer, your voice. Visit us at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. What is going on out there, everybody? Thank you for tuning into this live show tonight. We're going to talk about the new Super League proposal. That's right. Not the same one that was out a week or two ago that I had a show about and kind of went on a rant about, if you guys remember. But there's a new one out. And this one has maybe a little bit more oomph behind it, a little bit more power behind it. Some pretty highly influential people, I think, are backing this. And I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. We're going to go through the kind of the highlights of what it entails, talk about why it may or may not pass, and then I'm going to give you my opinion on it and why I think this could actually put some pressure on Greg Sankey. Greg Sankey almost at every turn has said, no, we don't want a Super League. You know, we don't want to lower ourselves to be like the other conferences. And I'm paraphrasing, but he's essentially been saying those types of things. They're just trying to catch up with us, all that kind of thing. But in this one, the way I read this Super League proposal that's out now called Project Rudy, named after the former Notre Dame walk-on, Rudy Rudiger, there's a reason I think it could put pressure, that members of these conferences could potentially put pressure on Petitti and on Sankey to at least consider this proposal, okay? Before we get into that, though, if you guys want to steer this conversation in any certain direction or you want to give your thoughts on this, be sure to enter your comments in the chat box. In the comment, the chat room is wide open. You can put your comments there. If you want to make sure I see your comment and it gets read on the air, you can hit the $sign in the chat box where it says say something, or it may say post a comment, whatever it says. Hit the chat box, hit that $sign. It highlights the comment. I will be sure to read it on air. And it's also an easy way to support what I'm doing here on the show. What's up, John Christophic? You are the first comment of the night, man. Thank you. And for those of you who may not understand, if you're not a West Virginia fan, you may be wondering, why in the world does Couz have a black background with the state logo? Well, it's Coal Rush week for us West Virginia fans. The Iowa State Cyclones are coming to Morgantown for a night game. West Virginia will be breaking out their brand new Coal Rush black uniforms for the very first time. And all West Virginia fans are embracing this. Even Ren Baker, the AD, the coaches have all turned their Twitter handles, their profile pictures on Twitter, rather, have all turned them a dark gray or black color in honor of this hashtag Coal Rush. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to include that as part of my YouTube channel. I already had on a black shirt. Decided to throw up the black background with the state logo. And as you see, it has a star where Morgantown, West Virginia is. All right. Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate that. Let's talk about this Super League real quick. Ross Dellinger put out an article talking about this, and it's called Project Rudy, and it's very intriguing. This actually may have a better – I still don't think – look, I don't know that this is going to happen, but I do think this Super League proposal has a better chance of happening than the one put out last week by the group called College Sports Tomorrow or whatever it was called. I don't remember the name of the group, but nonetheless, it was the one that West Virginia President Gordon Gee was a big part of. I think this one has a better chance of happening because it seems to be more well accepted by some of the higher ups in some of these, quote, Power 2 schools. But this basically, there's a group of former Disney executives, and we all know Disney owns ESPN, but some former Disney executives turned investment professionals are overseeing this group. The investment company they are a part of is called Smash Capital, and Smash Capital has brought this to the table for the betterment, in their eyes, of everyone, and for the betterment of the schools, for the betterment of fans, for the betterment of everyone, right? The conferences, everybody involved. According to them, all stakeholders here would benefit from this. In this model, they're saying all four power conferences would still be represented. You wouldn't be breaking up the conferences, but they would be set up in a 70-team Super League type structure. So all power league teams would be included, and they would probably have to add a couple more along with Notre Dame, obviously. It would preserve the four power conferences, like I said. It would expand the postseason. It would overhaul scheduling. There would be tiered revenue distribution, and it would infuse as much as $9 billion of private capital into the system. And again, Smash Capital are the architects of this model. They're a venture capital and private equity firm out of New York and LA. They have already presented this to more than 25 athletic directors at Power 4 institutions. They have either seen it in person or through Zoom calls. This has been presented. It's also been presented to 3 of the 4 Power 4 commissioners. The one that hasn't seen it yet is apparently Tony Petitti. Now, what makes this plan, in my opinion, or this proposal more intriguing, and one of the things, rather, that has it, to me, gives it more legs than the other one is the fact that Jack Swarbrick, former AD at Notre Dame, is now a member of this team. He is on board with this. He's pushing for this. And Jack Swarbrick has worked hand in hand with Greg Sankey on a lot of things. The college football playoff expansion is one example of that. Jack Swarbrick is one of the most highly respected figures in all of college sports. And he is on this team now pushing for this Super League. I find that very interesting. Jack Swarbrick carries a big stick. One high-level – now, most of these administrators spoke to Ross Dellinger under the condition of anonymity because this is such a sensitive topic. One of them said that the idea was brilliant, thought it was a brilliant idea, but reiterated that Sankey and Petitti will need convincing. It's going to be hard to get those guys on board. And, of course, they're thinking in their mind, man, we don't want to be out of a job here, right? And their conferences right now are the top of the food chain, and they don't want to lose that spot. But as we get further into this, you'll see they don't necessarily have to. Let's keep going. Now, the other thing I like about this proposal, the last proposal, the College Sports Tomorrow folks, they had it leaked, their format leaked out. It showed the regionality of the conferences, what teams would be in it, and all that. We haven't seen that with this Project Rudy yet, but what we did get that the other one didn't show us is the financial piece of this. Where would the money come from? How would it be divvied out? What are the tiers? Whatever. We're getting that with this. And again, this is all coming from sources, and it's all coming from Ross Dellinger's report, which I'll leave a link to in the description. But the revenue would come from increased revenue. It'd be from 2 sources: increased revenue from TV networks and corporate sponsorships. Smash Capital, thanks to this, will drastically increase TV revenue from the networks, and I'll explain how in just a moment, and also bring in a lot of corporate sponsors. And the reason it would increase revenue, and I know a lot of you are probably skeptical because you're thinking, how is it going to increase revenue when you have all these teams under one umbrella? Well, here's how. There would be more games between power conference programs by eliminating all games. Now, all games against G5 and FCS competition. So there would be no more games against Long Island University. There would be no more games against Marshall. There would be no more games against Georgia Southern. You name a G5 or FCS school, they would not be played in the regular season. It would only be power conference versus power conference. The second way, they would expand the playoffs. Now, this is not part of my outline here, but I did read where the G5, there would still be a G5 included, a G5 team included in the playoff. So they would not necessarily be excluded from that, just from the regular season, apparently, at least in one model. There also would be more games featuring blue blood teams. You would have more of the games. Now, that part right there, the SEC and Big Ten could almost do that on their own, right? And we all know they're going to meet this week in Nashville. We're going to see ADs from the SEC and Big Ten meeting with Petitti and Sankey in Nashville to discuss the future of college sports. And I'm sure this is probably going to come up in the discussion, I would imagine. So this leak is probably strategic, if I had to guess. But the SEC and Big Ten could take it upon themselves and say, well, look, we can do a scheduling agreement. And we can play each other. You know, we can play Ohio State versus Alabama. We can play Texas versus Michigan, which, by the way, is already happening to a degree. But you see my point. We can play Georgia versus Washington, whatever. If I don't know if you consider Washington blue blood, but you get my point. Play the top brands, Oregon versus Georgia. Play the top brands versus the top brands, right? They can do that on their own. But what it also includes are more rivalry games. They want to have more rivalry games as part of this, and that's another area where the revenue would come into play. There would be more rivalry games. You might get more West Virginia versus Pitts. You might get more West Virginia versus Virginia Techs. Those types of games would also be included. Cincinnati versus Pitt, Louisville versus you might get Louisville versus Kentucky more often. Those types of games would be included. That's another way. And we've heard ESPN's boss say before, rivalry games matter because they bring eyeballs. The media rights to all 70 teams will be consolidated under one agreement. Now, in my head, I'm thinking that could be subject to antitrust laws, but if they can include the G5 in it, maybe it wouldn't. I mean, heck, to be honest, what they're doing now could potentially be subject to antitrust violations. Now, there would be a tiered revenue distribution and relegation. There are both concepts being considered as part of this model. So teams could play their way into the top tier, or they could lose their spot in the top tier. And in a minute, we'll get to why that matters, because it's all centered around that revenue distribution. Per the slideshow presentation that was presented to the ADs and these leaders, they said it would increase revenue by $15 billion over a 12-year period. $15 billion with a B. Not million, billion with a B over 12 years. That's what they're estimating, they're projecting would happen if they, if this proposal goes in place, gets put into place, gets implemented. There will be an upfront infusion of about $5.3 billion to help with the transition period. It would help these power conference teams already have games scheduled several years out with non-power teams, right? With G5 and FCS teams. Well, they would have to buy their way out of those games. You would have to pay those teams for canceling, right? So part of that $5.3 billion would go to help pay off those games. It would also help supplement some of their TV revenue money. Now, we all know with private equity, there has to be something in it for the investors, right? Well, Smash would have, in this proposal, Smash would have ownership in the league to the tune of about 5 to 12.5% of any new revenues that would come in. So obviously that number, that's a pretty wide range there. 5 to, and I don't know why it's 12.5 and not 12 or 13, but from 5% to 12.5% of new revenues coming in would go to Smash Capital. That's how they would make their profit, according to this new model. And according to them, no school would see a decrease in distribution. I know that was one of the arguments I kept getting when I was on board with the previous proposal, from the College Sports Tomorrow folks. Everybody was like, because there's no way the top tier programs are going to accept a lower payout. And my argument was, we don't know that there's going to be a lower payout because we haven't seen the numbers. Well, here with this proposal, we're seeing the numbers, and they're saying there will be no decrease in distribution. And if you're asking how, the article gets to that next. Here's where it gets interesting, and why this is me talking this, I'm not quoting this, but this is my outline here from the article. This is where it gets interesting, and why many schools, in my opinion, even in the SEC and Big Ten, may actually encourage Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti to explore this opportunity. Tier 1 schools, the way they're going to tier it, you would have 16 teams in Tier 1, 22 teams in Tier 2, and then 32 teams in Tier 3 for a total of 70. Okay. The top 16 schools would receive an estimated $130 million per year in year 4 of the deal to $250 million in year 12. That's how much of an increase it would be from year 4 to year 12. For the top 16 brands, that's your blue blood schools. And in this article, it also talked about, and this is not really a huge part of my monologue here, but there are like 8 schools that bring in like 60% of the TV revenue. They would obviously be included. Among others, you would have Notre Dame, Texas, Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State. There were a couple others in there, but Georgia, I think maybe. But nonetheless, they would be included, and then you would add the other, quote unquote blue bloods to that. So you'd have your top 16 brands. I hope to do a video in the next few days where I tier these teams myself and say what teams I put in what tier. I think that'll be a fun exercise to do. Tier 2 could expect to earn about $60 million in year 4 and $110 million in year 12. That is right now about what the SEC and Big Ten are making per year. That 60 million number. Now, obviously, the Tier 1 number is, in some cases, more than double, or could be more than double what the SEC and Big Ten schools are going to make. So that would even be attractive to the Ohio. That might even be attractive to the Ohio States, to the Alabamas of the world. They could go from making 70, 80 million a year, or whatever it is they're making now, to making 130 to 250 million a year. That's why those schools may actually want to sit down and consider this proposal. I know the private equity piece may scare some people, but if you want to get into this kind of money, I don't know that there's any other way to do it without private equity getting involved or private capital getting involved. And you may see teams at the more valuable brands, the blue blood brands in these leagues, may push to explore this further. Even though Greg Sankey may not want to, even though Tony Petitti may not want to, they may push them to because they see this kind of money being floated around, or the idea of it anyway. And then when you've got your next 22 schools, some of those schools will likely have to come from the ACC or the Big 12 potentially. You don't think they want to earn double what they're making now, 60 to 110 million in that 4 to 12 year span? Why not? Right. And then in the last 32 teams, it would be approximately 30 million in year 4 to 60 million in year 12. That's basically what the ACC and Big 12 are making now. So those teams wouldn't necessarily benefit from it. Right. All right. So let's keep going. Unless there are some other things that make it worthwhile, like maybe regional travel, whatever. But let's keep going. It says tiers can be determined in various ways. They could base it on previous year's results, or maybe even an aggregate of results over a stretch of seasons. So you could look at, how'd they do the last 10 years? How'd they do the last 5 years? You could even go by how they did the previous year, where teams could potentially play their way in to that top tier. And there's even one model being floated around where there would be 8 permanent members of Tier 1. I think we can probably pretty much all spout off the top of our head who that would be, right? Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia. That's 6. Who would be the other 2? Anyway, maybe Oklahoma. Maybe, I don't know, Oregon. I don't know who they would be, but we could figure it out. But nonetheless, there would be potentially 8 permanent members in that first tier. That also may help entice the top brand teams to want to be part of this. The brands that bring in the most revenue now, who are worried about losing revenue in a deal like this could say, hey, we ensure that you're in Tier 1 every year. Even if you have a bad season, you're not going to get relegated. You're locked in. Maybe that's a way to push them forward and let them consider this proposal. And with all these talks of unequal revenue sharing being pushed, you've got the ACC now looking at unequal revenue sharing. You've got other conferences looking at unequal revenue sharing, right? It's now being talked about in both of these Super League proposals. There's unequal revenue sharing. There's unequal revenue sharing of the college football playoff. Who's to say the SEC and Big Ten doesn't want to look at this and say, hey, everybody's going to this unequal revenue sharing. The Ohio States of the world, the Alabamas of the world, they might sit back and say, why are we subsidizing the Mississippi States, the Vanderbilts, the Indianas, the Rutgers? Why are they making the same amount of money we are when we're bringing in 60% of the TV value, of the TV viewership? And what that would do is cause a crack internally, potentially, in those leagues between the haves and the have-nots, we'll call them, the top and the bottom. There could be some infighting between them. And that could push, if that happens, if that separation starts to happen, then those bottom teams, the Indianas, the Rutgers, the Mississippi States, the Vanderbilts, the Kentuckys, then they might look at this proposal and go, if you're going to push us out, if you're going to force us to take less revenue, then let's go over to this Super League model, the Smash model, the Project Rudy, if you want to call it that. Let's go to that model because we'll make more money there than we can by you pushing us out, and we keep our seat at the table. So I could see a scenario here where both sides of this could push for it. The biggest question I have in my mind, who would those bottom 32 teams be, and why in the world would they want to go for this if they're going to make the same amount of money as to what they're doing now? That part I would love to get. I wish somebody could answer me that question, because that's 32 of the 70 teams. That's almost half of your teams. You would need to get them convinced that it's the right move for them. How would it be the right move for them if they're making the same money they're making now? Right. And heck, maybe that's, I don't know. Maybe that's your Big 12 and ACC teams. Maybe you take the ACC and the Big 12. I mean, you'd have to leave a couple teams out, I guess, to get an even 32, but maybe those two leagues make 30 to 60 million. Maybe the bottom level teams in the Big 10 and SEC make the 60 to 110. But then that doesn't solve any problems. That doesn't help out those bottom tier. That doesn't help out the Big 12 and ACC schools. They're not going to be willing to sign on to that because it's not helping them at all. So I just think this could really, there's a scenario here where this teams inside the Big 10 and SEC could put pressure on their commissioners potentially to try to explore this opportunity further, or maybe even implement it, be part of it. I could see, like I said, the top tier teams may want to do it because they see an opportunity to make even more money. The bottom tier teams may want to do it because they see an opportunity to either play their way into the top tier, right? There's an opportunity for everybody to play their way into the top tier, or if they start getting squeezed out by the Big 10 and SEC's plan, they might see this as a way to say, hey, if you're going to push us out, then we're pushing for this plan right here, and you're outnumbered. There's a lot less of us, quote unquote, bottom feeders than there are you top blue bloods. We will force you to do this. I could, will that happen? I don't know, but I think it's a scenario that I could see it being possible. I want to hear what you guys think. Let's go to the comment section now, see what you guys have to say. That pretty much concludes my monologue. We've got the Michelle Weintraub in the house. We have the Eye Patch that's finally caught a live show. It's been a while. Thank you for joining in. By the way, for those who may have missed the explanation at the beginning, this is to celebrate Coal Rush Week here at West Virginia. Very first Coal Rush game in West Virginia history. They're breaking out those cool black Coal Rush uniforms for a night game this week against Iowa State. West Virginia fans are embracing it. We're changing our Twitter profile pictures to black and everything in celebration of the Coal Rush. I was not even able to live stream this to X because I changed my profile picture today, but you know what? It's worth it. Before we get too far, I want to remind you guys, if you want to place a bet right now at BetUS Online Sportsbook and Casino, if you're looking for a new sports book and you want to place a bet, you can do it at BetUS, and they have a special going on right now. You can get Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the graphic. On your very first deposit at BetUS, you can get a 50% bonus on your very first deposit if you use promo code YouTube150. Again, it's a 150% bonus if you use promo code YouTube150 at checkout at betus.com. Bet on any Big 12 game, any SEC, you can bet on any sport for that matter. It doesn't have to be college football. And on your next two bets, you get 100, or next two deposits, I should say, you get 125% bonus. And that is up to $2,000. If you do decide to bet, though, please play responsibly, and you must be 18 years of age or older to do so. All right. Let's get back to the comment section here. Eye Patch in the house, Tyler Cobb in the house, C. John in the house, Hidden Hawaiian in the house. Big 12 has done this for over a decade now. Drop the link to the article. Yes, I will do that. Bear with me a second here. Let's see. Was it not? Let me see. Let me go back here. Twitter used to be on my landing page there when I pulled up my Google Chrome, but it's not anymore for some reason. All right, this won't take but a second. I will drop the link for you guys in the chat box. Copy. Paste. There you go. That is the source where I got this article from. All right, let me see. Jeffrey Landis in the house says, so all of football would play a schedule like WVU's now. Yes, Jeffrey Landis. Basically, yes. Everybody can finally catch up and start playing Power 4 teams every year like we do. The Eye Patch says this is why the Big 12 needs to schedule more out-of-conference games versus Big 10, SEC, and especially the ACC. West Virginia's already doing it. They're actually looking to quit doing it. But now this may push them, something like this would obviously push them to change their mind on that, I would imagine. So Utah already has future games versus Wisconsin, LSU, and Miami. The Utes are doing their part with the scheduling. West Virginia, the last 5 seasons, well, excluding COVID year because they got canceled, but they played Penn State twice. They played Pitt twice, Virginia Tech, Maryland to open the season and in their non-conference play, in addition to an FCS school. And, not necessarily in that order, but those are the teams they play in that stretch. In a couple years, they have Alabama coming up on their schedule, along with Tennessee, if they don't get canceled. So West Virginia has been doing their part as well. And again, Ren Baker and Neil Brown are talking about trying to get away from that model because they think it puts us at a disadvantage, and it kind of has, to be honest. Arguably the toughest scheduling stretch in the history of the program, or at least as far as doing it year in, year out like that. They're using a tier system that Sports Illustrated did an article about 10 or so years ago. Interesting, Eye Patch. I didn't know that. It says greed will win out. It always does. Unfortunately, you're right, the Eye Patch. It will. Tyler Cobb hopping in. Hidden Hawaiian, thanks for coming in. Says somebody did a study that showed the Big 12 has scheduled most P5 out-of-conference games out of the conferences. It arguably has actually hurt Big 12 due to strong. Yes, it can, because those count. If they lose those games, it goes as losses on their schedule. It could keep them out of the top 25. It could keep them, it keeps them off the national spotlight, so to speak. People talk about strength of schedule, but when you look at a team, what's the first thing you look at? What's the record beside their name? And that that's a perception of a team you have automatically when you look at their record. Like right now, West Virginia's 3-2. Doesn't look very good. You dig deeper, you see both the two teams that have beat them are combined 10-0 right now. Pitt's 5-0, Penn State's 5-0, and both are ranked in the top 25, and Penn State's ranked in the top 5. So not too bad, right? But that don't matter. When you look at and they're 3-2, they're not ranked in the top 25. So I think it does affect them to it. I used to disagree with it, but the more I think about it and the more I dig into the numbers and the analytics and all that, I see that I think it does. I think tiers will be based on TV revenue. Have to be careful with this idea because media partners control who gets best viewing window. Best viewing windows results in high revenue value. That's true, C. John, but that's why they're, according to this, it's not based on TV revenue. It's based on success on the field. That's what I like about this model. It's based on success on the field, not about TV viewership. Now, the teams, at least that's the way I read it. Now, if they go to the model where they go to the one where there are 8 teams who get locked in to the top tier, that would be based off revenue, basically. But let's be honest. Those teams are always going to get the best numbers anyway, right? The Notre Dames, the Alabamas, the Texases, the Ohio States, the teams who draw in, 4 or 5 million views a week or more are going to get that top tier 1 slot most years, if not every year, depending on what model they choose. But the way I read it, it's going to be based more so on success on the field, more so than TV viewership. Now, I'm sure they could tweak it and make TV viewership part of the equation. No doubt about it. Stuart Mandel wrote the article. Will he be paid for his idea? I thought the article, the one I referenced, was written by Ross Dellinger, but are you talking about the one at Sports Illustrated? I think I may have seen that article, actually, now that you mentioned it. Hidden Hawaiians has said this before, but they don't want to actually compete for it. The fairest way of season performances should determine your tier. There was an interesting quote I saw from Brett Yormark today, who basically said, matter of fact, it may have even been in this article, but he said fans don't want an artificial champion. They want you to earn it on the field. Well, according to the way this was played, and that's why he's, in conversations about the playoff and all these other things. And Brett Yormark even went as far as to say that Brett Yormark made a comment that they should at least kick the tires on every idea. So Brett Yormark is willing to listen to this idea. And, again, conference commissioners would be a part of this. It wouldn't necessarily put them out of a job because this is only for football. They would still have to control all the other sports. And even the conferences would still be a part of this model, because basically here's the way I'm envisioning it in my head. You still have the model we have now, right? But instead of all of them having their own TV deals, they all have one TV deal. Now, this might require action by Congress to allow this, because right now it's not allowed. But they would be able to be all under the same same TV deal, and they would basically just do scheduling agreements with each other, right? And only play each other. They wouldn't be playing G5s and FCS teams. All their bowl games would be against each other. Obviously, they could expand the playoff to include more teams. Now, the playoff apparently would maybe include a G5 potentially, but you wouldn't play them in the regular season, but you would give them a shot in the playoff, which I think, I don't hate that. I think it's a good idea. But I'm envisioning a model similar to what we have now, just everything under one TV deal and more attractive games every week, right? West Virginia may not necessarily play. I don't know. And they might even rearrange the conferences, make them more geographic. I don't know. I don't know how they would do it. It would kind of make sense to do that so you could have rivals and geographic rivals in conferences together. I think that would make sense, but that wasn't listed in here. I think you could actually marry the two models that are out there, the College Sports Tomorrow group and this one, maybe marry them together and take the best from one and best from the other and merge them and do a Super League type deal. Why not? R. Seeker says NIL and the portal will create 80% parity in 2 to 3 years. Who is a dominant even this year? Well, to a degree, I agree with you somewhat, R. Seeker, but I still think you're going to have 8 to 10 programs that are always going to have an advantage. But they always have. Let's be honest. The Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Texas, those schools, Alabama, they've always had an advantage. Anyway, for multiple reasons. A, they're either in the SEC where college football is king. B, they're in a really big city with a lot of people, and they have a lot of support. They just have a really large fan base like Ohio State and Notre Dame. There are multiple reasons for that, but those schools have always had an advantage anyway. That's not going to change even with this new model. What this model would do, I think, is keep the advantage from getting too far out there, right? Keep the advantage from growing too much. At least that's the way I see it. And everybody would be able to afford, this house settlement that, by the way, is getting closer to being a done deal. News came out yesterday that one more step, that the judge, I think her name was Judge Wilkins, signed off on it. I think there's only one more step it has to go before it becomes, signed into law or signed into being permanent or whatever, approved, I guess would be the right word. To me, it's not coincidence that this leaked out today, the day after that came out, that Judge Wilkin had approved that. All these schools are looking for ways to pay these $20 to $30 million every year to their athletes and still try to keep up with winning, paying coaches, building nice facilities. Because all of that, at the end of the day, does one thing for these school presidents, and that's brings in more students, gets them more research money, gets them more eyeballs on their school. It's all about promoting the school with these presidents. And football helps do that. And if you lose your seat, if you're in the Big 12 or the ACC and you lose your spot at the table with the quote unquote big boys, it's going to hurt you down the road, I think. And they see that, and they're trying to figure out a way to solve the problem for everybody without causing the blue bloods of the world to go backwards in revenue. And this would do that, assuming it's all accurate. And again, these are former ESPN or not ESPN, but former Disney executives here. I'm sure they have a lot of connections. I'm sure they carry a lot of weight in these discussions. Super League just sounds like a meat grinder to me. Going to be a lot of banged up bodies. iPatch says Google college football program pecking order 3-0, ranking major teams by prestige. I'll do that, iPatch. I appreciate that. That might not be the one I was thinking about. I do remember reading one article where they kind of laid out their version of it, but I don't know if that was it. Robert Kaufman says Big Ten and SEC are in the catbird seat, and you all know it. They are not in any tough spot. They are busy making the rules to their liking. Right, Robert, and that's what I mentioned earlier. I don't know if you were here yet, but there are schools in these conferences that are going to look at this and go, wait a minute. You mean to tell me I can double what I'm making now? Why would we not do that? And there are other schools in there at the bottom of those leagues that might look at it and go, wait a minute, if you try to do your own thing and push us out, we want to go to this model. So this could put, and I think that this is just a theory of mine. I have no sourcing or nothing. This is totally a theory. I think somebody wanted this leaked out today before Sankey and Petiti go into those meetings with those ADs, because some of these schools may put pressure on them to do this, or at least to look at it more closely. That's what I think is behind this. I think a lot of these, because some of these schools want this. There were sources within the SEC and Big Ten who like this idea, but they just don't think Sankey and Petiti will ever sign off on it. As a matter of fact, in this article, when you read this article, you'll see the College Sports Tomorrow group that came out with the proposal, the last Super League proposal. They also wrote a letter to the Chronicle for college presidents. It's a basically a periodical or a newsletter that goes out to college presidents across the country. Well, Gordon Gee and the president of Syracuse both signed their signature on this, trying to get them on board so that the SEC and Big Ten doesn't go off and form their own Super League. Well, lo and behold, we found out by reading this article from Ross, there were two presidents from the SEC and Big Ten who had previously signed that letter as well. But before it went public, they pulled their signatures off of it. So there are schools in those two leagues who don't want to see those two leagues do their own thing. They don't want to see those two leagues leave everybody else behind. There are people who want the best for all of college athletics and all programs and all teams and all schools. Tyler Kopp says, my question is, why not fix the conferences if you're implementing revenue distribution? Most would agree that we would rather watch and players would rather play regional rivals if money stays equal. I agree with you, Tyler. I think that makes sense. Robert says they aren't doing any revenue sharing. Why would they? In the model that they're talking about, they would potentially make more money than they are now, even if they share some of it. Mr. Bloodline says, I don't like the top, but I understand your argument, and they probably won't at the end of the day, Robert, to be honest with you. It's going to be really tough to get them on board with this. Mr. Bloodline says, I don't like the top tier teams get to keep their spot if they crap the bed. Yeah, I don't like it either. But it may be the only way you convince them to do something like this. because they're not going to want to risk losing their top spot, their big dog status, or at the end of the day, that revenue that comes with it. Robert says it's all BS. Yeah, I agree, man. But at the end of the day, something like this is, and even in this article, as you'll see at the end, something like this is bound to happen, and it's bound to happen probably sooner than we think. And there are college leaders who think that. So it's inevitable. Something like this is going to happen. So it may happen. It needs to happen in a way that protects schools like West Virginia and Iowa State and Wake Forest and Georgia Tech and Duke and Kansas. Name one, right? Even Mississippi State, Vanderbilt. Those schools need to be saved as well, if possible, right? R. Seeger says, doesn't the Big Ten share its revenues equally? I think so, yes. Most conferences do. I mean, the only conference right now that's not doing that, as far as a power conference, I think they all do actually, except the SEC or the ACC is going to implement that rule where it's unequal distribution as far as your college football playoff money and that stuff goes. They're going to put a performance incentive in there. But outside of that, yes, most of them do share equally. The NCAA will soon be no more. Well, in this model, I think it would be outside of the NCAA, but it's my understanding that the NCAA would still be overseeing all other sports, right? And another thing this would do, this influx of cash from this private equity group would also go to help cover those sports, right? Because these schools are scared to death that once they have to start paying this house money, it's going to affect the sports downstream. It's going to affect the non-revenue sports because we all know the football revenue is what keeps those other programs afloat, football and men's basketball. And at some schools, probably women's basketball and maybe baseball to a degree. But outside of those sports, none of those other sports make money. They're paid for with football revenue money. Well, all of a sudden, boom, 20 to 30 million, that's gone to pay people. It's going to be, a lot of the schools may have to drop programs because of this house money. This might prevent that. This might help save sports in college. It might help keep schools from having to cut scholarships, All right. R. Seeger says, what is the exact issue requiring this solution again? It's basically to say, like I just said, a lot of what they call the have-nots of college sports or college football are worried that they're not going to be able to afford to pay for all their programs and everything because of the house settlement money they're going to have to pay downstream. And oh, by the way, while we're trying to stay competitive. Steve Ohio, Florida says tier system would be very difficult to manage year to year. What and how many different metrics would be used? Well, there would be a commissioner or commissioners that would oversee all this stuff. So it wouldn't be ungoverned. It wouldn't just be mass chaos. It would be organized. It would be basically like a semi-pro league, essentially. And all the conferences would kind of be like their own division, I guess. I'm just envisioning it in my head. Tyler Kopp says the ranking system of teams already suck. Determining who is in what tier would be even worse and create problems. It's all based on performance, man. I'm confused as to how y'all, if it's based on performance, are you saying there would have to be a committee or something to decide that? Is that your issue? That I could see there being an issue with, yes. If you determine it with a committee or whatever, yeah, I could see there being some issues there. Bagman in the house says, I love my team having all the advantages, though. I know you do, and that's the thing. That's why almost every Big Ten, but most Big Ten and SEC fans are against any type of Super League unless they're the only two in it, because they don't want to be quote unquote equal with anybody else or seen as equal to anybody else. They like being at the top of the food chain, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's where everybody wants to be, right? That's the American way. You want to be at the top of the food chain. You want to be as successful as possible. But the problem is college athletics is not set up for that. College athletics is not professional sports. You've got scholarships to think about. You've got funding of other sports to think about. You've got the marketing promotion to help get students into your school to think about. You've got Title IX implications, which that's not even part of this, but you've got so many other things you have to worry about as a school that have nothing to do with sports, or at least not this sport in football. The college sports system is not really set up to be a for-profit model, but it's turned into one. And that's the problem. And the NCAA was not willing to accept that early enough, and now it's forcing these types of things to have to be discussed. What's up, Andrew Galvin, who's a VIP member here on the channel? Thank you, my man. He says, what's happening, Couz? He says he thinks WVU will be okay. Probably so in the end, Andrew, but, man, I can't help but worry about it to a degree. Mr. Bloodline says Disney messes up everything. Matt Bagman says, would West Virginia rather join the ACC to play the rivals again or SEC Big Ten for more money? You know, I would – my initial thought would be SEC. But, man, I don't know. It would be harder to compete in the SEC, to be real. I mean, obviously, I'd like the Big 12 to stay afloat. I like the Big 12. I miss having rivals. Ideally, I'd like to see the ACC, and I'd like to see the Big 12 be able to get a few ACC teams in the conference or something. That would be best of both worlds, I guess. But, yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, obviously, everybody wants to be in the Big 10 or SEC. I think if you say you don't, you're lying, because there's kind of some bragging rights to go along with it, you know. So I would probably say if I had to pick, I would say be in the SEC or Big 10. Big 10 is not going to happen because of our academic, where we are academically. We don't meet their criteria. And even SEC's I think they've gotten stricter on that too over the years. But I think West Virginia would have a better shot at getting in the SEC than they would the Big 10, because I think the SEC would be willing to overlook it before the Big 10 would. iPatch says you take the money because you're going to need that cash to attract 4- and 5-star talent. Great. Andrew Galvin says, I think we would be shocked at how many of these who are high up in the college football world who are against the whole take our ball and go home. I think for most of the Power 5, it'll be fine. David says Utah to Big 10. Maybe one of these days, David. Andrew Galvin again says the powers in college football, I think, know they need the Iowa States and WVUs and the NC State's fan bases to keep college football culture and vibe alive. I don't believe Utah would get an invite to the Big 10. How does this translate? Mr. Bloodline says, how does this translate over to basketball? Some teams are amazing at one sport, but not the other, like Duke or UConn or Georgia and Clemson. Yeah, that's a great question. Somebody mentioned this earlier. If this happens and football kind of separates and does their own thing, will this incentivize Brett Yormark and maybe even other commissioners to go out and try to get those upper echelon teams in basketball like the UConns? Maybe then UConn becomes more attractive to the Big 12, because then strengthening your basketball would be better, because you don't have to worry about what they bring in football at that point, because football's already over here doing its own thing, right? So you can do what you need to do in football. And, oh, by the way, at the same time, let's strengthen our basketball and make even more money on the back end, right, on the other side. So, but who knows? I mean, at the end of the day, it would still be – I'm assuming it would stay under the NCAA umbrella. You would still have March Madness. You would still have all that, at least in the beginning, because I think this new Super League is only for football. At least that's the way I read it. Let's see. iPatch says he's not sure he would want the Utes in the Big 10. Becoming another Iowa-type team isn't tempting. Bagman says he can't find an NC State fan on social media. There are a few. I actually know a couple. Tyler says that's what I'm saying. The AP is based on performance, how good a team is expected to be, and how good they perform on the field against equal competition, and it still sucks. Yeah, I mean, it's all unless you go strictly by some kind of computerized system where there's no or you just have all these conferences, and whoever you win the conference, you get in the playoff. I mean, that's the only other way to do it, right? You win your league, you get in the playoff, and all the champions compete. That would be the only other fair way to do it. And as far as tiers go, yeah, I don't know. That would be the tough part. How do you decide who goes up and who goes down? Yeah, great. That's a great question, and I don't have the answer. Andrew Gollin says, talking to Bagme, and says, if college football becomes a league of 30 teams, college football loses almost half of college football fans. College football is about very regional fan bases. They lose that with a super league. Bagme says, you're right. I'm going to deny it. Give me the SEC, Couz. Bring them on. Just give us 3 to 4 5-stars every year, though. Yeah, we would need it to compete in the SEC for sure. But, if you walk into the state of Ohio, if you're recruiting the state of Ohio, which West Virginia does, and you're recruiting Pennsylvania, which West Virginia does, and you walk in with an SEC patch on your chest, it would probably mean something, especially if you were the only school in that region in that conference. So I think they would be able to recruit much better if they were in the SEC. But, I thought they would recruit better going to the Big 12, and it really hasn't helped that much. When you look at their rankings, recruiting rankings. That may have actually hurt them because of the travel. I don't know. Tyler says, unfortunately, an ideal world doesn't exist. So what I would like to happen is what I said to you the other day, Couz. ACC and Big 12 merge, split, and create their own league playoff structure. Yeah, I wouldn't mind that at all, man. Obviously, if West Virginia's, if teams like West Virginia, Virginia Tech, these ACC Big 12 schools are in danger of getting left out, then maybe that's what they need to do. They just say, screw it, we'll go do our own thing, have our own playoff. But there, the problem with that is I'm not sure the revenue would be there if you're not part of the college football playoff. Then you're not going to get the revenue from that. Your playoff is not going to generate as much revenue, so you would take a hit there. So I don't know, man. It would be, they might take a hit financially by doing that. I don't know. Daniel says West Virginia has dropped 5 interceptions on the year, and they have the second fewest penalty yards with 142. Yeah, I did see that. I did see where they led the Big 12 in fewest penalty yards when I was doing some research for my video that came out today on my Big 12 tier list, my Big 12 tier rankings. West Virginia leads the conference in that category as far as fewest penalty yards. So that's pretty remarkable. Good, clean football, right? They need to limit the turnovers a little better. A few too many interceptions in there for my liking, but they'll clean that up. But that is interesting about the dropped interceptions. I wasn't aware of that. Fortunately, the last couple of games, they've seemed to be doing a better job of holding on to those interceptions. They've had 3 in the last 2 games now. So that's a step in the right direction after having none the first 4 games. I think it was. The first 3 games, I'm sorry. After having none the first 3 games, they've had 3 in the last 2 games. My math wasn't mathing there. Anyway, I don't really have anything else to talk about, guys. I just want to come on here and bring you guys this information and give you my thoughts on it. I like the idea. On the surface, it sounds like it's something that could work for the betterment of college football as a whole to help it would include everybody, potentially rising tides lift all boats. It could potentially lift the tide for everybody without hurting the top echelon teams. They could even increase their revenue even more. Everybody can increase. My only question is that third tier. If that third tier, if those teams aren't going to be increasing their revenue, I would like to know why in the world they would even consider this. So anyway, that's something I would love to get an answer to. Mr. Budline says, I remember West Virginia having some really big years where the whole nation had eyes on them. I like the Big 12 too. It's always been a fun league with some shootouts. Absolutely, Mr. Budline. You're on the money, my man. iPatch thinks you should use a 5-year win-loss record. If your win-loss is at or below 500, then you drop down and later. That would be a fair way to do it, I guess. But what if everybody's playing uneven schedules? You know what I mean? With that many teams, you might have one team who has to play Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia, and the other team don't. They might play Indiana, Purdue, and Iowa State. I don't know. Just throwing teams out there, I might as well say West Virginia, so I'm not biased. But you see what I mean. Unbalanced scheduling makes that tough. Thank you, Mr. Bloodline, for liking and subscribing. And yeah, I recommend everybody, if you don't mind, hit that like button for me. I'm about ready to shut this baby down, but once you go out, on your way out, hit the thumbs up button for me before you close it. All you got to do is close the chat box with the X in the corner. You'll see the thumbs up button. Hit that real quick. It only takes a second. It's absolutely free to do so. Also, don't forget, if you're watching this on the replay, after the live's over, thumbs up, subscribing, all that still helps the channel. It still helps get the video pumped out, because once it's not live anymore and it's on demand, at that point, it's basically just a regular video. So likes, subscriptions, all that still help. Please share it with your family and friends. Let them know about Couz's Corner. I cover West Virginia, the Big 12, and conference realignment. I'm very intrigued by the Super League stuff. I think it's an interesting conversation. I don't know how many people actually are, but I like it. So I like getting on here and talking about it. So anyway, thanks to you all for jumping on here. And thank you, Jeff. I'm glad you were able to catch it, my brother. Thank you, Andrew, for that reminder. But yeah, thanks to all for jumping on here. Again, don't forget my sponsors, BetUS Sportsbook and Casino in Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Butner. Thank them for helping me keep the lights on. Go to Couz'sCorner.com/shop if you want to get your Fanatics gear. If you want to get your ONIT athlete trading cards that support your favorite student athletes through NIL, or if you want to get you a cool Couz's Corner shirt or something. As a matter of fact, the shirt I have on right now is in that merch store. So if you want that shirt or anything else over there, go check it out. Couz'sCorner.com/shop, and you'll see those three options there. Click whatever option you want and go shop on that site. Thank you all. Have a great night. Have a top shelf night. Top shelf day if you're watching it on the replay in Q Country Roads, baby.